In live from Seattle to answer questions about every aspect of Steam and also the exciting new Steam Deck. So let's hope this works. Alden and Eric, can you hear me? Welcome to GI Live.
Hello, yes, we can hear you, and thank you very much. We're excited to be here.
Great stuff.
Good morning from Seattle.
Good stuff. I think you're going to start by perhaps going through some of the more common questions that you get asked by developers about Steam. So do you want to go through them, and then we'll come back for some Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've assembled a number of questions that I think folks have asked and that we often get asked, and we thought we'd cover those first at least and talk about those. And Alden, I think I can get started here and just kind of kick off the first question, or do you want to ask the first question?
Well, we can start a little bit by just introducing ourselves quickly.
Oh, that's probably
My name is Alden Kroll. I'm a designer at Valve, and I work on Steam, both on the design side and the business side. So designing the Steam store and also the backend publishing tools that you all make use of as you prepare your games for release on Steam. So I have a pretty good knowledge of how the features work, and I spend a good amount of time doing kind of sessions like this to help kind of answer common questions and spread understanding about how to make the most out of your release on Steam. Eric?
I'm Eric Peterson. I work on the Steam business team at Valve, and I spend a lot of my time helping publishers and developers launch their games on Steam and kind of consulting them through that process. And I also spend a bunch of time, either working on new features or helping to communicate to developers about those new features and explain kind of how they work and what we're working on right now. And so part of that, is talking to all of you today. So. We're here to answer your questions. Well, cool. We might as well get started. I'll kind of kick us off and just kind of read off the first question that we're going to address today. And it's about Steam Deck, which is pretty topical. A bunch of people have been asking questions about Steam Deck. You're probably curious about it, and we can answer more questions about this later on if you have any. But the first question is, how easy is it for me to make sure my game on Steam will work on Steam Deck at launch? And that's a really, really good question. First of all, I'm glad that somebody might be asking that, because that's awesome, and we think it's great that you want to support Steam Deck. The answer is it should be pretty easy to ensure that, and we're working hard to make sure that that's the case. First of all, I would suggest that if you don't have a Steam Deck dev kit, you can actually set up your own Linux test environment where you can run your game using Proton and just make sure that everything kind of works okay. And we think that that's a really good kind of first step, and also a pretty good simulation of how running a game on Steam Deck will work. I'm going to post a link here in the chat in just a moment, or Alden can, that is a link to our documentation that explains exactly how to set up a test environment if you need to do that. Steam Deck it's just important to remember that Steam Deck is essentially a portable gaming PC that happens to run a Linux-based OS, and it has a controller built into it. So one of the first things that I would suggest is just making sure that that your game runs on Proton and has full controller support. So just booting up your game in a Linux test environment with a controller and trying to play the game only using a controller is a pretty good first step in trying to identify any potential issues. And we're going to be talking a lot more about Steam Deck compatibility and how to ensure your game is compatible and providing the best possible experience on Steam Deck pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I would just suggest checking out the documentation link that Alden posted and going from there. So the next question.
Hey, Eric, how would somebody get a Steam Deck dev kit if they wanted to actually get their hands on the hardware?
Yeah, that's another very topical question. So we recently opened up the hardware request form, which is our way of accepting requests for Steam Deck dev kits. And that is open now. There's a link here which we can post that just takes you to where you need to go to request that hardware. And you're welcome to request one if you're developing a game or you're an existing Steam developer. They're a pretty limited supply right now. We're manufacturing as many as we possibly can right now. And most of the first batch has really been spoken for. So, you know, we essentially don't have a whole bunch more to send out, but we will be making more over time. And our hope is to try to send out another flight of them as they become available. So feel free to request one, and we'll get to it whenever we can. Another question that we get is kind of more just about best practices. And this is a general Steamworks one that I think is valuable to hear from you, Alden. It's, you know, what are the top 5 Steam features that you think every game should have, or that Steam thinks that every game should have?
Yeah, I guess what we found in practice is that there's not really one size fits all or one specific set of features that is going to work perfectly for every single game. So what we find is more useful is to look at all the features that Steam offers and see which ones make the most sense for your game and your situation, your development team size, what you can accomplish, and you know what works best with your game. For example, controller support is something, you know, that actually a lot of players have controllers. I think we ran some numbers a little recently that showed some 30 million players on Steam played games with controller devices of some kind. A big portion of that is Xbox controllers, but also PlayStation controllers. So if you're thinking about controller support, a lot of people just default to Xbox controller support because it's easy, but you should also really be thinking about all the other devices that people have that they might be playing your game with. So we have an API, Steam Input API, that just makes that easy to write one integration that works for any kind of controller that users plug in. But that doesn't necessarily make sense if you've got a game that is absolutely terrible to play with a controller, given the genre of the kind of game that it is. So you have to kind of make that choice yourself, depending on what your game is and how it handles. There's other features that players really appreciate, such as Steam Cloud Saves. Allows them to make sure that, you know, if they uninstall a game or they get a new computer and they come back later and they want to pick up the game where they left off, that they can still do that and have the confidence to know that their saved game is saved in the cloud, you know, for later. And then we recently introduced a new feature called Steam Playtest, which can be a really useful feature if you're trying to get some kind of beta testing of your game ahead of release, and it operates as a secondary kind of standalone app under your main game. And you can use that as a way to get a bunch of people into a beta test, gather their feedback, and, you know, not have to worry about them leaving reviews or anything like that. It's its own kind of test environment that you can turn on and off and let players in, you know, based on how many players you want. So you can also control for load. If you're worried about too many players overwhelming your servers, you can let in a small amount and kind of open that up over time. So really, you know, I encourage you to check out the homepage of Steamworks. There's a big listing of all the features that Steam supports there, and kind of look through them and look through the documentation to see which ones really make the most sense for your game and where you are in your development life cycle. This kind of, I guess, there was kind of a secondary follow-on question of just how important are achievements or badges to sales. We look at things like, well, achievements are a great way both to reward players for doing interesting, you know, accomplishing milestones in your game, but they can also be a useful way to teach players about interesting ways they can even play your game. So a lot of players will go through and look at the achievements, and that might offer some clues as to interesting ways that they might interact with the world, or things that they might not have even considered trying in the game. So those, I think, are valuable for their own right in those kinds of ways. Things like badges and trading cards, those are fun extras for your players, but they're not hugely important to sales. We see a lot of players, or some players, that will jump into the forums and demand trading cards for the game. And I mean, I think then you're starting to see that are players really, they don't want my game unless it has trading cards? Then are they really wanting that game for the entertainment value that game offers, or they just want the game for the trading cards? So it's really important to think about, you know, first catering to your customers that are most excited to play your game because of the entertainment value that your game provides itself.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. This is kind of about marketing and tracking.
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can track external links through to purchase on Steam, Eric?
Yeah, so this is a question that that we've received quite a lot over the years, and these kind of questions that we get from developers, both in settings like this and in conversations, help us to build new features. And we actually built a feature to support this recently. So many developers, on Steam choose to do some kind of external paid marketing to support their game, whether that's with, other websites or search or whatever it is. And we wanted to build a tool that could help enable our partners to evaluate the effectiveness of their marketing campaigns. And so we added a UTM tracking feature into Steam, and I actually made a video to explain what that is and why that might be useful for you. I won't go into details now because, well, there's a video that you can watch, but I'll post it right here. And that goes into all the detail that you need to know on how to use the feature and what it can do and why that might be relevant for you. Another question that we get asked often, probably the most often, is about visibility on Steam and how to get your game featured on Steam. And so,
yeah.
Alden, I'm going to ask this question to you. And how do you get featured on the Steam front page or in Discovery? Is it just an algorithm, or is there someone that I need to talk to personally as a developer to try to get my game featured on the front page? Do I need to know the right person? How does it work?
Yeah, so we put a lot of work into making Steam as a platform where players want to play their games and also offer a bunch of features for developers that make it easy to ship your games and run your business. And we wanted to build Steam as a platform that can be kind of a level playing field, and that you don't need to have a secret handshake to get your game featured and shown to the right customers. So instead, we build Steam to be personalized around each of those players based on what kind of interests they have, what their social network looks like, who they follow, the kinds of things that they're interested in, and make the Steam store be able to surface the right games to those players based on those interests. So there's a lot of things when you go and visit your front page of the store that are going to look different for your front page than my front page, because we play different games. We've wish listed different games. I follow some curators that make recommendations. I follow some game developers that I want to make sure I hear about their next release on Steam. I have friends and they post recommendations for certain games. I may be I'm certainly in a different country than many of you, so I also get a slightly different top sellers list. Those are regionalized, so I might see the things that are best selling in the United States, and you might see the best things that are selling in the UK right now. So there's a lot of things like that across Steam that will be modified and different for each player. So for you as a game developer, the things that you can do is make sure that the tags applied to your store page are accurately reflecting what your game is and the different styles and themes and genres and elements in your game. There's a huge variety of different tags, and so I encourage you to spend some time looking at those and applying the tags that make sense and accurately reflect what your game is. There's also systems like Curator Connect that you can interact with to get your game in front of people that can write reviews and recommendations for your game to their audience. And then also thinking about where else around the internet you can find where your potential audience hangs out and talks about games and talks about their interests, and how can you engage with those communities and let them know that your game exists and that your game is coming, and get them excited for it so that when it gets to launch day, it's not the first day that they've ever heard of your game. We also have been putting together more kinds of events like Steam Next Fest, where we can help shine more light on upcoming games and give players a festival and an event to go and try out a bunch of demos and get excited about games that are coming up.
Is that curated, Alden?
It's going to be releasing, in the next.
Sorry to interrupt. Is that curated?
Steam Next Fest is. Yeah, it is open to any developer that wants to put their upcoming game. It's intended for games that are releasing within the 6 months after Next Fest. But that's basically set based on your intended release date. We know release dates change, so that may change over time anyways. Any game that's eligible can participate, and then we take all the games that signed up and we kind of go through there and we categorize them into different subgenres and different categories so that we can help players find the kinds of games that they're interested in playing and be able to check out your demo. So in order to participate in Next Fest, you'll need a playable game demo, and that gives the players something to come and get excited about and try out your game and get a taste of it.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think in general, the high-level answer to this whole question is we do very little manual featuring on Steam. We do that for some of the curated promotional spots like weekend deals, midweek madness, daily deals. And those are things where you can reach out to us and say, hey, I'm looking at making a big update to my game in 2 months, and I was wondering if it would be a good fit for a daily deal to coincide with that big update, or something like that. Let us know kind of what your plan is, what kind of interesting milestones are maybe coming up in your game that might be a good fit for throwing a celebratory promotion around it. And we're totally receptive to those kinds of ideas, and we'll let you know whether your game meets the criteria or not to be featured in those spots. But by and large, the rest of Steam is really built around the player and what their interests are and what their tastes and games that they like to play.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the. Sorry, Eric.
Sorry to jump in. So are those curated spots as well. Is that those are all based off of customer metrics and kind of customer interest. It isn't because Alden or I really like a game or that we know someone. It's usually just purely on, or not usually. It is always based off of the actual customer interest and those metrics. So even the curated stuff is just it's around what customers are interested in and what they want to play.
Yeah. One of the follow-up questions to that was about when should I put my game on sale or offer a discount, and is it best to do it at launch, or do you give heads up on developers on upcoming sales, for example, the summer sales and things like that? What kind of advice do you have for developers on that?
Sure, we can talk about that. So the general question, I'm just going to restate it. Jamie, you're a little quiet, but I think that essentially, when should I put my game on sale or offer a discount? Should I do it at launch? And honestly, it really, this is the most unsatisfying answer, but the answer is it really depends, when it comes to things like launch discounts and what kind of an offer that you're planning on giving customers and whether it makes sense for your game. But the broad advice that we have is step down over time. We generally don't recommend a really, really aggressive discount right at launch, something like 40 or 50% right off the bat, because that really kind of, it does a couple things. One is that it doesn't give you much room to discount in advance, in the future. And the second thing is that it kind of sends maybe a strange signal to customers in the sense that, what's going on with this game and why are they discounting it so heavily? So don't go too big too early with your discounts. Whether or not you do a launch discount is really up to you. There are developers out there that I talk to on a daily or weekly basis that swear by launch discounts and say that that's their secret to success, and others that don't run launch discounts at all. And honestly, both of them are successful. So it really it is up to you to decide whether or not it makes sense to run a launch discount, or that's going to help you to stand out from the crowd. A lot of people do both different directions, both ways. We do announce the dates of major seasonal sales months in advance. You may see them on the partner site. You might see them on Reddit or Twitter also sometimes. And so, we would recommend that you plan out your discounts well in advance and think ahead about how that discount is going to step down and how it's going to appear. And if you have offered a really deep discount in the past and you offer a less aggressive discount in a future sale, you can kind of expect maybe less interest in your game, simply because customers are smart. They know that that maybe isn't the best deal that you've run in the past. So think about that in advance, and maybe even plan out, a lot of developers that I talk to plan out their discounts a year in advance or even 2 years in advance, and think about those things and what their plan is. We also announce other promotional opportunities, as early as we can, and our plan is to start announcing them even more in advance so that developers can help to think about what their discount calendar looks like over the year, and what kind of discounts they want to appear in. But ultimately, I think that nobody knows your game and your audience or your beats, your marketing beats, your updates, your events, whatever it is that's happening in your game better than you. So we can't give you broad advice that's going to apply to your game necessarily, other than to say these are some best practices to think about.
Yeah, cool.
That's a great question. That's a great question to think about. So I had one other kind of going back. Jamie, if you have other questions, feel free to ask. If there's other questions, we're happy to jump into them. I can get back into some of the more common questions. And one of the questions that we get often is about wish lists. And this particular question, I think, came from the audience. And the question is, what is your advice on wish lists? Is it better to encourage wish lists or pre-purchases?
Yeah.
Does the Steam Store algorithm pick up first day sales as a result of wish lists more than pre-purchases? This is a fantastic question, and I love this question for a bunch of reasons. One is that it gives us an opportunity to give you some concrete information on how Steam actually works, and it also gives us a chance to dispel some rumors, which I always like doing. So let's talk about what wish lists are and why they're valuable, first of all. So wish lists are really, really great, but one thing that we've learned over time is that they're a little bit misunderstood. I think partially because there's a little bit of noise in the background, developers telling each other things and maybe trying to make assumptions. And some of that is on us in trying to get information out about how our features work and how things work. But the reality is that they are fantastic, but there's actually very few places on the store that actually surface games based off of the number of wish lists. Wish lists alone aren't really the metric that we use to surface games. They're also kind of easy to manipulate and not really the most concrete way for customers to communicate that they're interested in a game. So the store doesn't really surface games all that much based off of wish lists. The value of wish lists is in notifying customers via email and the Steam client when your game is released and when it goes on sale for 20% or more. So the more that you can gather those wish lists in advance, and we've actually done, our economists have looked into this and actually done some studies and figured out that the earlier you can get your coming soon page up, the earlier that you can start generating wish lists. It has a valuable knock-on effect over time where you're gathering more wish lists, and the more wish lists that you can gather that are genuine, that are people interested in your game, that want to follow your game, that has value, but not value in immediately surfacing your game on Steam. It has value in you get to, an email gets sent on your behalf by Steam to all of those customers who have wishlisted your game, letting them know your game is out. That's a powerful tool to kind of remind people who are interested in your game that it's out, and also when it goes on sale. So the second part of this question is about pre-purchases, and this is a pretty easy one to answer, is that we generally don't recommend running pre-purchases or pre-orders. And the reason for that is that they can actually take away from those day one sales, because what you're doing is you're taking the demand for your game, which would normally be concentrated into a peak right at the launch of your game, and you're spreading it out over time, over a few weeks or maybe even months. And what that's doing is it affects the way that Steam views the launch, because Steam is constantly looking for a burst of customer activity. It's looking for a big, like, wow, and, a bunch of customers are interested in this game. We're going to recommend it to more customers and see how they feel about it. So when you spread it out over time, it can actually affect your impact on day one, and having a big impact in terms of sales and the number of players and word of mouth and everything kind of happening at once can be an effective tool in getting the word out about your game. So we don't think that they really make a lot of sense unless your game is one of the biggest launches of the year and an enormous launch. It can have an effect on that day one impact of your game. And so that's one reason why we don't recommend them. The other is that they really just generally don't make a lot of sense unless you have a really compelling offer to customers, because for a customer, they need to be convinced to kind of purchase your game in advance. And if there isn't something that really, like some extra value that they're getting or something that they think that is really important to them, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So in summary, ultimately, Steam Store doesn't prioritize different types of purchases or whether or not it's happening in pre-purchase or wish list or whatever. But the goal here is to try to make the biggest impact that you possibly can. Typically at launch, doesn't have to be at launch, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But try to make that impact, and wish lists are a really powerful way to do that. And sometimes pre-purchases can kind of work against that. So that is the answer to that question. Related, I'll also answer this question because it's about wish lists and I was just talking about them, is that another developer question that we'll get a lot, and I think this is a topic among developers, is there a magic number of wish lists? Like if we get 10,000 wish lists, or if we just I heard that if we hit 50,000 wish lists, that that's going to guarantee that we're featured on the front page of Steam. That's not true. There's no magic number. There's no milestone. There's nothing on Steam that says that when a game hits X number of wish lists, that it's going to be treated differently. It really, again, wish lists just reflect the organic interest in your game, or they should, in advance of the launch. And the value in that is one, is that it's a tool to help you to spread awareness about your game. It's having a coming soon page is a landing page where you can send customers and have them learn about your game and hopefully wish list it and find it over time. And also, get that email when the game launches. But we don't really rely on wish lists as a concrete number, again, to kind of to feature the game on the front page. The value is just gathering that awareness over time and capturing it. And we don't have any magic number. There's nothing there. And honestly, it wouldn't make sense if we did, because the number of wish lists that would make a game successful to your mind would really depend on who you are as a developer. If you have a giant AAA game and that you're working on for years and years, you're going to have a different goal for wish lists than you would if you were a two-person indie team that is launching their first game. And so it's really all about just gathering the interest that you can over time.
Great.
Alden, I'm going to throw you a question real quick. And that is, do you have any case studies about like what works best for running discounts or sales over time?
I think we've talked about sales and discounting, kind of stepping down your discount over time.
Yeah, I guess we've covered that.
Were you looking for something different than that?
Yeah, we've covered that a bit much. But how about streaming? Streaming live from your store page, does that actually improve sales? Does that make you, does that help you have a more successful launch?
Yeah, I'll talk about live streaming a little bit here, and then we can go back to Amy and see if there's some questions for the audience in a session. So live streaming, has become a fairly big part of Steam in that, at any time game division. And
sorry, Alden, I think you're breaking up a bit there, Alden. Sorry, could you
really
repeat
get a
that?
sense of what your game is like to play. Sorry. Yeah. So at any time, game developers can live stream directly to your store page, and the benefit of that really is showing players what it's like to actually play your game. So we find that that's really useful around big events, like around launch or around a big discount or a big update to your game. When a bunch of players and a bunch of eyeballs are on your store page and players are trying to understand what your game is and why they might be interested in it, that's a great time for you as a game developer to live stream playing your game and showing it off in its best light. And that really gives players that really accurate, true to form, idea of what it's like to play your game. And so I think that is really the biggest value in live streaming. It is really hard to tell concretely whether and to what degree that influences purchases of games. We've heard some stories from game developers that have run their own analysis and found it hugely valuable. But we haven't been confident and able to do that across the whole board and say whether that's true or not in every single case.
Yeah, I see. I'm just going to remind everybody who's watching on the stream and also in the audience, we're going to come to questions in the next sort of couple of minutes. So if you want to ask anything, just start forming those questions and then we'll put them to Alden and Eric. But for you guys, do you want to, we've got a couple more things. So do you want to go through one of the other popular questions about, I think one of them was about if you have a poor start to sales, if it doesn't go well at launch, can you ever recover that? Can you kind of relaunch it and, fix a problem at launch?
That, absolutely. So the question is, if you have a tough launch, which happens time to time, can you recover? The answer to that is absolutely. And part of that, it goes back to Alden's explanation of how the Steam algorithm works and how Steam works in general. I won't lie, a really strong launch is really important, and it can certainly help you to find success. And that's generally the time when a lot of developers will get a lot of their sales and find momentum for their game, but it's not required. And there's nothing that Steam does to kind of mark a game. Sometimes I hear this question is I had a tough launch for my game. Has Steam decided that my game isn't interesting or shouldn't be it shouldn't be recommended to other people? And that's actually not the case. So going back to what I said earlier about how Steam works, Steam is constantly looking for a burst of customer activity. Typically, when you think about what a burst of activity looks like, that's at launch, when a whole bunch of customers are coming in and buying the game. But if that doesn't happen at launch, that could happen at any time later on. And a good example of that is sometimes I'll talk to developers and they'll say, actually, we had an okay launch. It wasn't spectacular, but we continued to work on our game. We had some negative reviews. We listened to community feedback. We worked on the game, and we actually found that year 2 and actually year 3 were our most successful years for our game on Steam. And that's because over time, they're building more and more of these kind of moments on Steam, whether that's a discount moment or event or other thing, and working towards that. So that's that burst of activity. And so that could happen later on. It can happen right at launch, but it's absolutely possible to come back from a bad launch, whether that's because of negative reviews or just lack of interest. One thing that Alden and I have talked about over the years is that there's a certain amount of work, I think, that's involved with game development. Well, there's a lot of work involved in game development, but some of the work is in getting awareness out about your game. And sometimes developers will be so focused on making the best possible game that they can that they're not able to put the cycles in to get awareness about their game until the game is out. In some cases, the day that the game is available on Steam, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that your game is doomed to fail or that it's not going to do well. It just means that now that you've launched the game, there's still a bunch of work to do in terms of getting the word out about it, whether that's working on your social media, working on your community, your Discord, talking to live streamers, doing some paid marketing if you want to do that. Not required, but if you want to. So there's a bunch of things that you can do to get the word out about your game, and we'd recommend doing that regardless. So it's absolutely possible to come back from a tough launch.
That's great. I think we're going to see if there's any questions from our audience, both online and in the crowd here at London. Oh, there's a few hands going up. So can you hear me, guys? We're going to hopefully going to be able to hear the question here from somebody in the audience. Okay.
Hi. So as a live service game, it's very important for us to understand the behavior of our audience. So what we learned in our analysis is that our revenue comes more than we would have liked from the traffic on the Steam page instead of the actual CCU in the game. So what we're trying to work on and find out is why are there, for example, 25,000 people on Wednesday and then suddenly 30,000 people on our Steam page on Thursday, but the data data on that side on Steam is very limited. It's very hard for us to know why are these people there, where are they coming from, and why is it different one day or the other. Is there anything planned to expand that data set, or anything you can point us towards that we should look into in that regard?
Yeah, I think I understand that.
Okay, I'm glad. I had a hard time hearing the question.
I think it's
so
really about. Yeah. No, I think what he's asking is, he gets different amounts of traffic to the store page on different days,
Yep.
and it is somewhat opaque as to where that traffic is coming from or why there's more traffic on some days than other days. I don't think we really have a great answer for that. There's so much complexity to how users navigate around the store and which things are being surfaced above other things on any given day, depending on, because right, your game is basically in a pool among a bunch of other games that are maybe in very similar situations. And on one day, some other game may be doing terrific, and that might bump your game down one spot on the list. And that might have a big impact on how many players get exposed to that game on any given day. So it's really hard, just because how dynamic the store is. There's a lot of kind of fluctuation from day to day in which games are being shown and where users are even moving around through the store. So I don't really have a great answer on, where exactly, well, actually, right, there's the traffic reporting that you can see within Steam that shows you which pages and which sections of each page traffic is coming to your store page from. So you can kind of look at that over time. That doesn't really give you much that's actionable. It's mostly telling you, what is Steam doing for your game, where and how is it routing traffic to your game. If you have external sources that you are routing your own traffic to your game, you can, as Eric talked about earlier, you can use the UTM tracking to get a better sense of, how many of those are converting to adding the game to their account and playing it. But from within Steam, there's just kind of a lot of fluctuation. It's really hard to account on any given day, like exactly why that is happening.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that question. We've got another question over there. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this one a bit clearer.
Hello. Is there any difference between the Steam Deck dev kit and the retail unit?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Sure, very little. The answer is that, of course, it's pre-production hardware, and there's still going to be some, some fine tuning and some fit and finish and some smaller things. Manufacturing kind of changes in the way that the unit is built, but functionally, as a developer, it's very, very close in terms of everything that you need to worry about, performance and playability and everything else. Yeah, so very little.
Great, thank you for that question. We've got another one at the back there.
Hello. I wanted to ask if there are any future tools which developers could use to protect their products from negative reviews bombing, for example.
Did you hear that, guys?
I caught the first part about if there are any future tools, but then I missed.
Yeah.
So I'll repeat my question. Are there any future tools or plans which developers could use to protect their products from negative reviews bombing from the community?
Yeah, so we actually built a feature to protect developers against that. I believe it was in the last 2 years. So if you as a developer feel that you have been review bombed, or that your game has been kind of negatively review bombed because of something that wasn't really related to the game itself, then you can, there's a button that you can press, and maybe we can find the documentation here to point you to it, but there's a button you can press to say, hey, Valve, help, I think my game is being review bombed. And then what that does is that generates an alert or a ticket within our system, and a group of folks on the Steam team will then review that situation and try to investigate it and figure out if there's a review bomb happening. So there is a button that you can push to say, I need help. And we built that specifically for the kind of case that you're mentioning.
Great, thank you for that question.
Yeah, and that's really designed for when there's kind of off-topic review bombs, where there's a bunch of people that are replying or piling in on a game and writing negative reviews about something that's not really core to the gameplay experience or the game itself. If you have a bunch of negative reviews just because your game has a bunch of bugs, that's really important to look at in terms of feedback from players. What are they strongly reacting to that is, what is negatively impacting their experience? And either that is a result of expectations that they have about the game and the game not living up to that. And so in that case, that might be how you're presenting the game on the store page or what you're telling players about what features exist in the game. And then if they launch the game and don't find those features or the game doesn't measure up to what they expected, then that can cause a bunch of negative reviews. So it's useful to make sure that you articulate your game accurately and truthfully to players as well. And then, after launch and if you're still getting negative reviews about gameplay elements or things like that, that's really a useful form of feedback. And Steam does also have some built-in functionality, so if a player leaves a negative review and then continues to play the game, Steam will automatically prompt them again and say, hey, you left a negative review and you're still playing it. Do you still, do you want to change your mind, basically? So there's some tools in place to help kind of remind players that maybe long ago they left a negative review, but they seem to still be enjoying the product.
Yeah. Great. I think we've got time for one or two more. If there's anybody got a question, I've got plenty here, but if you've got anything you want to ask. I was just going to ask you, Alden and Eric, about the most popular languages after English on Steam. What are the ones that, if you've got a limited budget as an independent developer, which languages should you be targeting to sell the most games after English?
Yeah, I can take this one. We've done some studies in games that added languages after they released to see which ones seemed to have the biggest impact. And what we found was that, generally speaking, the languages from countries where players are less likely to speak English as a second language were really the most impactful. So if you're looking at a variety of languages that you're considering supporting, some of the most important ones for reaching customers in those countries are languages like Korean and Japanese and Chinese, and Turkish was also high on that list. And these appear to be countries where a lot of the population doesn't necessarily speak English as a second language, and so those are really key languages to translate into if you have a game that is going to be well suited for those audiences. So the other thing to think about when you're considering localization is, where are your players? If you're making, a really detailed simulation game that, most of your audience might end up being Germans, and so that would be a really good, genre, language to translate into. But if you're making a JRPG, for example, then you probably want to consider translating your game into Japanese because it's going to have a big audience and market there. So really look around at what are the other games that are similar to yours, what languages do they support, and using that as a comparison. But really especially those East Asian countries, those languages seem to be the most important for actually reaching players in those countries.
Great, thank you. Final question. How do developers get a Steam representative to work with them if they've got a game launch coming up? Do you work with developers and help them at launch? What can they do to get in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to answer this one. So we hope that you do get in touch with us, actually, and we have a system in place to get a hold of us. So we moved away a number of years ago from kind of a one-to-one, communication kind of contact to a ticketing system, and the ticketing system that we have is actually answered by the Steam business team itself. I'm answering tickets every day. I was actually answering tickets right before this panel. And the reason that we use a ticketing system is because it helps us to actually gather all the information about your game and in one place. So we can see who you are, what your game is, what your partner info is, everything that we need to know to help you really quickly. And what's also great about it is that it means that your question doesn't get stuck in my inbox or anyone else's inbox because of the number of questions being asked. It's distributed across a large number of people, and so we can answer you more quickly and easily. And so we found it to be a really useful tool. There's a support button in Steamworks. If you're familiar with Steamworks, there's a button on the top that will generate a support ticket, and then you'll get it kind of will filter out and say, well, I want to ask a question about this. You can just type in your question and it will get answered really quickly. And it will go to the very people that actually are here empowered to help you. So that's a great way to get a hold of us. And honestly, the best way to get a hold of us when you have questions about your launch. And we can handle anything from, hey, I hit the launch button on my game and nothing happened. Help, what do I do? To I'm interested in running a daily deal. Would you be willing to take a look at my game and here's my plan. So anything under the sun, we can help you with it, and that's the place to go.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alden Kroll and Eric Peterson, for joining us today, live in London. It's been brilliant. A round of applause for Eric and for Alden as well. Thank you. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Thank you all for coming, and we enjoyed our time.
Great stuff. Speak soon. Super. That's it for the Valve session. Coming up at 5 p.m. is our pre-recorded keynote talk from Jim Ryan, CEO and President of Sony Interactive Entertainment. And we'll also be hosting networking drinks now as well, just outside. Sorry, online, you're going to have to get your own drinks. But thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.